Hello everyone, welcome to IBA 614 Global Marketing. My name is Dr. Sheena Boateng and I'll be your facilitator for this course. In today's session, session 1, we are going to focus on two main topics. 1, the introduction to global marketing, and 2, the initiation of internationalization among firms. By the end of this session, we hope to achieve a number of learning outcomes. 1, to understand the concept of global marketing. 2, to identify the driving and restraining forces affecting global integration and market responsiveness. 3, to discuss the reasons and motives why firms internationalize. And 4, to appreciate the barriers hindering the initiation of internationalization among firms. So let's start from the introduction to global marketing. Why are firms going global? Prior to the introduction of the internet and other forms of information communication technology, firms were relying mainly on the telephones and postal service to be able to do business, which limited their ability to do business beyond the borders of their domestic region. However, with the introduction of the internet and other forms of information communication technology, firms are now able to do business well beyond their geographic borders, to sell products and services to customers in markets other than the domestic markets that they are used to serving. Particularly, firms are able to use global marketing as a means of survival, to avoid losing their domestic business to competitors who are able to produce products and services at a lower cost, and perhaps may have more experience and better products than they do. But what is global marketing, and how does it differ from the regular marketing that firms are used to conducting in their domestic markets? Global marketing is defined as the firm's commitment to coordinate its marketing activities across national boundaries in order to find and satisfy global customer needs better than the competition. So by this definition, we are saying that the difference between global marketing and regular marketing lies primarily in the fact that global marketing goes beyond the domestic borders of a firm to do business with customers and individuals and organizations in foreign markets that are beyond the borders of their current domestic market. Whereas regular marketing is practiced by the firm mainly within the confines of their domestic market. So by implication, global marketing's definition means that firms can do a number of things. 1, to develop a global marketing strategy that is based on similarities and differences between markets. Why are we saying similarities and differences between markets? When it comes to global marketing strategy development, firms appreciate the fact that the current domestic markets that they serve has certain characteristics in terms of the customer base and the nature in which to provide the goods and services to them, which may differ or may be similar to the operations within other markets in foreign countries, as well as the customers within those countries that they hope to serve. Hence, in developing a global marketing strategy, firms take into consideration the fact that there may be markets that share similarities with the current domestic market that they serve, where they will be able to fully sell what they are already selling to the domestic customer in those markets. However, there are certain markets too that will exhibit differences from the current market that they serve, and hence they would have to develop appropriate strategies to adapt what they are currently offering the local customers within their domestic region to foreign markets where customers share these differences from their domestic market. Also, through global marketing, firms are able to exploit the knowledge of their headquarters or home organization through worldwide learning and adaptation. Why are we saying this? Over years of firms operating within a particular domestic region, they are able to obtain certain kinds of information and knowledge that puts them in a good position to appreciate the ways of doing business in other regions, which perhaps may share similarities with the current market within which they are operating, or may have differences from it. So in the event that these new markets they wish to serve have these similarities to the current market that they serve, they can utilize the knowledge and the learning that they have obtained from serving the current market to serve products and services to customers within these new foreign markets. However, in the event that they share more of differences than similarities with the markets that they currently serve, they have the knowledge to be able to adapt what they are offering the local customers to the needs and wants of the customers in the foreign markets that they wish to serve. Also, firms are able to transfer the knowledge and best practices from any of its markets to use them in other international markets. Why are we saying this? Once the firm is able to operate in one or two markets, including the domestic market where the firm is based, they are able to gather a lot of knowledge and best practices as a result of operating in these diverse markets. So once they decide to go into a new market, based on whether they are able to establish similarities or differences between the current markets that they serve and this new market, they are able to transfer knowledge and best practices that they have gathered from serving the markets that they currently serve to be able to go and serve the customers within this new market that they are targeting to enter. In essence, we are saying that global marketing involves a firm focusing its resources and competencies to be able to take advantage of unique opportunities that they identify in the global marketplace. At the same time, being able to develop appropriate strategies to counter the threats that they identify within the same marketplace. Thus, the nature of a firm's response to global market opportunities depends largely on the resources and competencies that they possess, as well as the assumptions and beliefs of the management of the organization as it relates to doing business in different parts and markets in the world. Hence, we can use a framework that is referred to as the EPRG framework, developed by Perlmutter 1969, to be able to appreciate the assumptions and beliefs of management and how they influence the firm's orientation towards doing business or selling in foreign markets other than the domestic markets that they currently serve. Now, the EPRG is an acronym that refers to ethnocentric, polycentric, regiocentric, and geocentric orientations that guide the decision-making of management of these firms who seek to sell their products and services in international markets. So we will take them one after the other. Let's first talk about ethnocentric orientation. Now, with firms that operate an ethnocentric orientation, they believe that their home country is superior. And therefore, every single thing that they have been doing in their home country currently with regards to serving the domestic market, they transfer wholly to serving other foreign markets that they enter into. Hence, their headquarters extends their business practices to these foreign affiliates and controls decision-making and actions that are taken in these markets in a centralized manner right from the headquarters in the domestic market or in the home country. Thus, the organization and technology implemented in all their foreign locations or their foreign markets or affiliates are largely the same as that which is being operated in the home country. So, for instance, you walk into a Holiday Inn in the United States of America, and it has certain features and characteristics that are unique to the Holiday Inn brand. You walk into a Holiday Inn in Ghana similarly, and you will see the same characteristics as that Holiday Inn that you saw in the United States of America because of the ethnocentric orientation of the organization and how they operate. We can also talk about ethnocentric companies like Zenith Bank that we learned from one of our classmates, having the ability to duplicate what they have been doing in the home country in all their foreign affiliates, such that even the technology that they use in their foreign affiliates is imported straight from the home country without any modifications to suit the local market. However, with a polycentric orientation, like that which is operated by companies like KFC, which we have observed in Ghana with the introduction of jollof as part of their menu, and companies like Walt Disney, who tend to add local spice to their brand when they export it to other foreign markets like Japan and Spain, we realize that they are operating an orientation where they appreciate that their home country and the product that they have been serving to consumers in their home country is superior. However, they also believe in and appreciate the uniqueness of the different markets that they hope to enter into and the characteristics within this market that sets them apart from the domestic markets that they are used to selling in. Hence, companies of this polycentric orientation will usually adapt their products and services to the different conditions in the different locations or markets in which they wish to serve their products. And this is the best way that they are able to maximize their profits because they can be able to customize the product to suit the unique needs of the local markets that they are entering into, while staying true to the uniqueness of the original brand as it was exported from their home country. Hence, with a polycentric orientation, firms are able to decentralize decision-making amongst the heads of their affiliates, such that they do not control all the decisions that are taken in their affiliates from the headquarters in their home country. They are able to give their affiliate companies the freedom to make the decisions that best suit the unique conditions in the markets that they are operating. As a result, communication between headquarters and their affiliates are very minimal, because in the event that there is something that has to be done, the affiliates have to have the authority to make those decisions based on the unique circumstances that they are facing at the moment. So headquarters maintains a distance from their affiliates and allows them to adapt their decision making to suit the needs in their markets. Hence, the polycentric multi-domestic orientation that we are talking about. Okay, so we'll take it from the regiocentric orientation point. And we were saying that for regiocentric orientations, firms seem to think about foreign markets as in terms of regional denominations. So they break them up into regions. Instead of looking at them as single individual markets with unique differences, they treat them as regions that have unique characteristics. So we can divide them into regions like Europe, Asia, Middle East, and you find out that companies like Coca-Cola and Unilever have very interesting regional formulations that they use to market their products globally. And it dictates the kind of products that you can obtain in certain regions and products that you can't obtain in others. And we are saying with the regiocentric orientation, the firm tries to integrate and coordinate their marketing programs within regions, but they will not use the same program across regions. So they'll take each region and treat them uniquely based on the characteristics of that region, and then sell to them depending on the nature of their market and how far they have to adapt their product or service to suit that market. For the geocentric orientation, however, the firm views the entire world as one potential market. So they strive to develop integrated global strategies that will respond to both the similarities and differences that exist in the world markets. Again, we are invoking ceteris paribus, such that they cannot be able to satisfy all the similarities and differences in the different regions as it relates to their product. But they strive as much as possible to be able to satisfy the similarities and differences within the markets that they choose to operate in, right? And this pushes the firm to think in a global way, but act locally. Think globally because they appreciate that there are so many markets around the world that have different characteristics, and they have one product that they want to sell to them. However, they know that to be able to sell the product effectively, there are certain local nuances in these global markets that they at least have to pay attention to when it comes to their product or service offering. And that is what is known as glocalization. Please, are we okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it possible an organization could fall under 2 or 3 types of this categorization? Because
Please, I can barely hear you.
yeah, I'm asking whether an organization can fall in 1 or 2 or 3 types of this categorization or this framework. Sorry.
Yeah, it's possible because firms sell multiple products. In brand management, you learn about the product portfolio of companies, right? In brands, and the different product extensions, line extensions that they have. There are certain line extensions of Coca-Cola that we have never even seen before in Africa, but they sell massively in other parts of the world. So it depends on the firm and their resources and their competencies and the opportunities that they see. A firm may see opportunities in the Middle Eastern region, so they'll treat the Middle East as a market and sell to them. Whereas they will see an isolated opportunity in a country like the US and treat it as the polycentric organization as one market outside of their domestic market. So yes, a firm can be operating different orientations in different locations, depending on the opportunities that they have identified, the threats that they see, their resources and competencies, as well as the host of other factors that we were talking about earlier. Please, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
So now that we appreciate the different orientations that firms can operate in, let's talk about the global marketing strategy. Now, when it comes to global marketing strategy formulation, like we said earlier on, it's all about the firm striving to achieve the globalization mindset, where they are thinking globally in terms of all the vast opportunities that the global marketplace offers them. At the same time, acting locally by appreciating the fact that in individual contexts, there are differences. And these differences, if not taken into consideration, can be a major hindrance to the firm's marketing activities, right? So most firms adopt and practice this globalization ideology through dynamic interdependence between their headquarters and subsidiaries. So depending on the orientation that they have, headquarters could either play a very pivotal role or a minimal role in the marketing of the product of the firm in their various foreign markets. And this global marketing strategy begins at the root from the value chain functions. Because essentially, when a firm is going global, the value chain functions are what determine the ability of the firm to create and deliver value to the final consumer. So here, like we talked about in terms of resources and competencies, when it comes to developing global marketing strategy, the firm would always choose to carry out their value chain functions in the locations where they can obtain the highest level of competence. And in this case, we are referring to cost effectiveness. So the cheaper, the better. That's why you have a number of multinational companies like Apple and Nike choosing to manufacture the base products or some of the parts of their final products in countries like China, where it is most cost effective because of the cheap labor and their ability to be able to get what they want at a lower price. So in this case, glocalization refers to the development and selling of products or services that are intended for the global market, but they are adapted to suit the local culture and behavior of the people within the markets that they want to sell. So when we talk about value chain functions, we are talking about the functions that range all the way from the downstream activities to the upstream value activities. And we can break down the activities in terms of primary and support activities, such that you have companies, like I said, including Apple and Nike, who have perhaps their operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, service and inbound logistics, which are primary activities, being done in different parts of the world. And then having certain support activities, either situated in their domestic environment or, again, outsourced from different parts of the world, depending on how cost effective it will be for them. So you have companies like Standard Chartered Bank doing most of their marketing and sales in countries where they are operating. However, they have certain things that they outsource, like some of their human resources. Every time you call a StanChart helpline, you get responded to by an Indian call center operator. That is a typical example of a company outsourcing a certain competence to a location where they believe it is cost effective, right? You have companies that are mostly ethnocentric, doing most of their procurement, like we learned in the Zenith example, from the home country, because that is where it is cost effective for them. So they will not waste their time to procure things like technology from the location that they are currently operating in the foreign markets. They feel more comfortable and they believe it's more cost effective to do it from the home country than to do it in the foreign location where the company is located. So that is how global marketing strategy proceeds in terms of the value chain. And like I mentioned earlier.
Oh, sorry, a question on the value chain.
Yeah.
If we can kindly go back to that slide.
Yep.
Yeah. I want to understand why these activities, inbound logistics, still service, are considered as primary activities, and technology, procurement, human resource are considered as support activities.
Okay, so depending on the industry that you're operating in, some may be primary and some may be support. For instance, if we are operating in the service industry, for instance, human resource will be a primary activity. You agree?
Definitely.
Good. So it depends on that, but this is a generic model that we
Okay.
use to give general explanations for these things. But then there are modification and adaptations that come as you move between different types of products and services, and again, different industries.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And then upstream, downstream.
Yeah.
What's the rationale in?
Downstream is where you are getting closer to the final consumer.
Okay.
And then upstream is where you are putting things together to be able to get the product and service together to bring downstream to the final consumer. So until the product gets to the consumer and it is sold, you can't talk about margins, which are profits.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Doc.
Yeah.
Please, I also want.
Hello, you've gone off.
Hello, Doc.
Yes. Please speak. Is that Evans? Okay, Evans, you can speak.
Oh, sorry, please. I don't have a question.
You don't have a question? Okay, I thought your hand was raised.
Doc, sorry, I'm back here. Edwin
Okay.
here.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so I also wanted to find out, our sourcing maybe technology from the other countries. Is it just because it's cost effective, or there could be other reasons?
There could be other reasons in terms of competence as well.
Okay. Competence and maybe trust and all.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's proceed. So like I mentioned earlier, being that the firm knows and appreciates that despite the similarities that their domestic market shares with the foreign market, the foreign market has its own unique idiosyncrasies. So when it comes to global marketing strategy, the marketer always balances himself between complete standardization and differentiation. The strategies in recent times always lie in between the two, where there's no complete standardization and complete differentiation. However, the firms tries as much as possible to standardize what they can given the conditions in their foreign market, and then localize as much as they can to suit the unique characteristics of the foreign markets that they are entering into. And that is what we call the glocalization mindset. So this framework tells us basically what influences the firm into adopting a glocalization mindset. And it includes all the things that impact the firm on a global level and a local level, right? Including the region that they are operating in, the culture of the people, as well as the resources that they have as a firm, right? And how these resources play into their ability to sell their products in this foreign market. So that is what we refer to when we talk about the glocalization framework. So in order for the firm, in essence, to do this global marketing strategy and ensure that it succeeds, they have to make sure they achieve two pivotal things. The first one being global integration, which we have hammered on severally since we started this lecture, that they need to recognize the similarities between international markets and their domestic markets and integrating them into their overall global strategy. At the same time, too, they need to appreciate the unique idiosyncrasies of these markets and also implement those into their global strategy. At the same time, too, there should be market responsiveness. And this is where the differences are highlighted, because you need to appreciate that there are differences as a firm in the markets you want to enter into to be able to respond to these differences. So in the shift towards integrated global marketing, firms need to place a lot of importance on the transnational similarities. What do the new markets we want to enter into have in common with the current markets that we are serving? right? And what do they not have in common? And to be globalized, we need to make sure that the similarities are more than the differences. Because if you decide to adapt your product in every single market you go to, it has its own organizational and cost implications, right? So for global marketing, it's about highlighting the similarities and putting in place measures to adapt to unique local situations to make sure that your product sells. So what are the major drivers for this shift into global integration and market responsiveness? We can first talk about multilateral trade agreements. Firms have identified that regardless of whether they make a move or not, the boundaries within which they operate, particularly the governments that they are operating in, are day in, day out entering into all manner of trade agreements, right? Today, I found out that the whole of Africa has entered into the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which has all manner of implications for firms operating in different African countries, because it changes the playing ground for marketing across boundaries and selling products to consumers in different African countries. And we have seen this happen time without number in other geographic dispensations like Europe, where they have their own union and economic zone that has its own rules when it comes to trade. As much as they have been able to create a unique area, they have also come up with their own currency and their own rules for trade within the EU. And all these things affect firms that want to sell within this particular trade region. And to bring it home, we can also talk about Ghana that has signed onto a number of trade agreements that are benefiting several Ghanaians and helping them to be able to sell their products and services across national boundaries. Ghana currently is a member of a number of trade agreements, including the World Trade Organization, the AGOA, we have ECOWAS, we have the African Union, which has just enacted the African Continental Free Trade Area, which again will have implications for people who are looking to sell products outside of Ghana to other foreign markets in Africa and the rest of the world. So multilateral trade agreements are one prime driver of why firms would want to engage in global marketing. Another driver we can talk about is converging market needs and wants, right? Currently, the world is globalized. People all over the world share commonly recognized cultural symbols, such that when you go to a country like China and you mention Beyonce, people know Beyonce in China, people know Beyonce in Kenya, people know Beyonce in the Middle East, people know Beyonce in Antarctica. And regardless of how we try to delineate the differences in these markets, they all gravitate towards this one cultural symbol. And they have a certain view of her which transcends their nationalities and cultures. And that is one example of what we call convergence of market needs and wants, because they are all buying into what she's selling as she is selling it with no adaptation. So cultural homogenization, as we call it, implies that there is potential for firms to do their business in a worldwide manner using products that are largely standardized. So you have brands like Coca-Cola and Nike selling essentially the same thing everywhere around the world, except for minute differences. So we just established a few moments ago that Coca-Cola, for instance, does not taste the same in every part of the world. However, there are different variants of Coca-Cola, again, that you can obtain in different parts of the world. Some in some parts of the world, some you can't get in other parts of the world. Whereas Nike has standardized products that sell the same, in the same way, manner, and form to everyone around the world, such that someone in Ghana will order a Nike Air Jordan, and it is the same Air Jordan that will be sold to someone in Japan, that is going to be sold to the person in Ghana, and it's going to be sold to any other person who orders it in any part of the world. So that is what we call cultural homogenization, such that firms can now produce products that are universally desired in a standardized form. So the business consequence of this is that firms can sell similar products and services to similar groups of customers in almost any country in the world, as we have rightly observed right now with shoe companies like Nike in companies like Coca-Cola. Another driver we can talk about is worldwide communication, which some call the information revolution, right? And this is what has revolutionized global marketing. Because due to worldwide communication competencies that have been developed by various firms and even individuals, global marketing is no longer an institutional or organizational phenomenon. It can even take place at the individual level, where you have individuals who are selling huge amounts of product to buyers in different parts of the world without even having office locations. And this is as a result of new internet-based low-cost communication methods that can enable a high school student to start a business on Instagram and within a matter of months be moving thousands, hundreds and thousands of dollars of product across boundaries without making a physical move to any foreign location, all done through the enablement of internet-based technology. So customers within national markets are able to buy and sell similar products and services across different parts of the world without even having to do any physical movement from one geographical location to the other. And that is how worldwide communication through the internet revolution has helped in driving global marketing. We can also talk about global cost drivers, and these are categorized as economies of scale and economies of scope. So these days, there's a movement where firms are trying to sell as much as possible to make the highest level of returns. However, they want to be able to produce these items they are going to sell at the least amount of cost. So you have issues with industries like the fashion industry consistently being accused of fast fashion, where they produce all these items of clothing in third world countries for rock bottom prices and sell them in more developed countries for high prices. And that is what we call economies of scale, because they can produce bulk for cheap and sell it for high returns. Now, this means that lower value activities can be outsourced to emerging and developing countries, like I said, in the case of fast fashion, where these countries offer a low cost of labor and can produce a large amount of items at a time. And the result is that there is a disenchantment of the value chain, where previously close-knit value chains are now opening up to let in countries that were previously ignored in the value chain, enabling local players to be able to get in on the mix, such that a dress can be manufactured in China, but once it gets to the US, in some instances, you can even have the labels being changed, and you cannot even tell that it was produced in that place, because even though it was produced in China for a lower cost, the quality is still the same. So that is what we talk about when we refer to global cost drivers. Next, we can also talk about leveraging. And leveraging here, like the word means, is taking advantage of some type of benefits or some type of experiences that a company has obtained from operating in a particular country or pursuing opportunities in new geographical markets, right? That do not make them spend as much time and effort and money as they would have perhaps if they were doing the same thing in their domestic market. So firms tend to leverage a number of things when it comes to global marketing. For instance, they can leverage things like experience, where they may not have the expertise in their domestic country to develop some form of technology or have the level of human resource skill in their domestic country to achieve a certain level of competence. However, they can find these experiences in other countries, and they would leverage these experiences to be able to build their global presence to achieve a sustained competitive advantage. You can also leverage things like scale economies, resource utilization. There are certain resources that they may not have access to in their home country, but may be abundantly available in other foreign countries. So they would rather relocate their production facility to a foreign country where that resource is available in abundance to be able to benefit off that resource allocation to reduce their cost in producing their products and being able to sell in multiple markets, which translates into their global strategy. So that is it for the drivers of global marketing. Please, does anyone have anything they want to say or any question they would like to ask? before we go?
Yes, ma'am. Salio, there's explanation to the economies of scope. If you can read that.
Okay. So while we talk about economies of scale being the firm being able to produce a lot and then reduce costs by producing a lot, economies of scope refers to the number of products that they can produce at a time. Whereas it will be very expensive to produce more than one product in their domestic market, they'll be restricted to producing just one. However, once they are able to expand into other countries, they get the opportunity to produce a wider scope of products, perhaps for the same reduced cost. Because in their home country, for instance, we can say that the consumers in the home country do not have taste for that other product that they would have liked to produce. However, by virtue of expanding into another country, they can use the same capacity that they were using to manufacture that one product in their home market to manufacture that additional product that they would sell to the consumers in that other market for the same cost or perhaps even cheaper. And that is what we refer to when we talk about economies of scope. Please, does it make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. So we can use another example as those who will tell you that they do not print anything less than 100 copies of complimentary cards. If they printed below 100, they would be running at a loss, right? But anything 100 and above, they would be working at a minimal cost. So they would rather print 100 and above. And by expanding into a global market, a firm can be able to sell more than the 100. So by manufacturing 100 and above, they are beating down costs and they are making their returns at the same time by selling multiple products in different markets. Tease, are we good?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
I think I missed the point 4.
The global strategy.
Yes.
Okay, so the global strategy in terms of leverage means that hitherto firms would only operate in their domestic market. And imagine if in your domestic market, there were only about 2,000 people who had taste for the product that you had to sell. You were only limited to selling to those 2,000 people. However, once you are able to step out of your domestic region, you realize that there's a whole global market out there with millions of other people who also have a taste for the product that you're selling. They have not in its standardized form, but in an adapted form. So the global strategy in essence means that you can leverage the benefits of going global by selling to more people in more markets so that you can be able to make more returns. See, does it make sense?
Yes, please.
Okay, so that's it for the global strategy. All right. Now, despite the drivers that firms have, there are also certain restraining forces. One main force we can talk about is management myopia and organizational culture. Not every organization is into going global. They do not see the benefits of expanding into a global space. Some companies, by virtue of their nature, especially when it comes to small and medium scale enterprises that are usually run by entrepreneurs who are comfortable operating within their comfort zone in their current market dispensation, they believe that it will be too risky to step out of the confines of the domestic market, which they are so comfortable with and know so well. And that translates into management myopia because they cannot see how successful they can become or the number of opportunities that they have at their disposal if they decide to step outside of their local region, right? So you realize that successful global companies who have learned to integrate their global vision with their local initiative have been able to expand and make huge returns to become.
Hello, madam.
Yeah.
Please, is it every company that will become profitable when they go global? Taking from the point where you said they've not realized how profitable they'll become when they go global.
I invoked ceteris paribus in the beginning when I said that we are discussing all these things in terms of the ceteris paribus principle when we are saying all other things being equal.
assumptions.
Good.
Thank you very
So
much.
we are not saying that as a mass, when you go global, you will become successful. But it is highly probable, depending on the opportunities you are able to identify and how well you are able to take advantage of these opportunities. Please, does it make sense?
I think so.
Okay. So we are not saying that at all costs, if you go global, you will succeed. But firms who have been able to see good opportunities and have been able to take the risk and take advantage of these opportunities have succeeded. And we have many examples of such companies that are operating in the world at the moment. So that's what I mean when I talk about management myopia. Okay. Next, we can also talk about national controls. Now, every country likes to protect their local interests. And we know that for some time now.
On the management myopia,
Yeah.
who takes the decision to go global? Is it management? Is it the board? Is it the shareholder?
Like I said, it depends on the type of organization you are dealing with. If it is an SME and the decision making rests solely in the hands of one person at the top, who gives either the go ahead or places the stop, it relies on that one person to decide that we are going global or not. There are several multinational companies that are run by one person who takes a lot of the decisions. If you take a company like Tesla, for instance, or SpaceX, Elon Musk has been notorious for taking a lot of individual decisions, even though he has boards that are at the helm of these companies. He's been notorious for taking a lot of the decisions on his own and putting his own resources at risk of making a lot of these huge global moves that in the beginning seemed to fail, but ultimately paid off and have made him the billionaire that he is today. So it depends on the nature of the organization and the leadership formulation of the organization. So whoever the decision-making power lies with is the one who decides that they can go global or not. This doesn't make sense.
Yes, it does. So shouldn't the overarching point be that instead of management myopia? Because management myopia would seem to be, those managing the day-to-day operations of that particular business.
Exactly, which can be one person or a number of people.
So we can refer to that single individual as management.
Yes, because decision making and everything rests in him.
Okay.
So that's it for management myopia and organizational culture. Now, in terms of national controls, we are referring to the fact that firms operate from geographic regions, and these geographic regions have governments that rule the operations in these regions. So when it comes to your decision making to go global, you may be ready to go, you may have all the resources and the competencies in place. However, there are certain controls that the national government or the rulers in these geographic regions have put in place that may limit your ability to go international, right? And these often stem from the decisions by the government and the regulatory bodies in these geographic regions to protect the firms that are operating within these markets. So the firms and the enterprises within these markets are being treated as people who have preferential characteristics over firms that are coming into their markets from a foreign location. So you have certain policies in countries like Ghana and Nigeria that were enacted recently that banned all manner of imports into the country, all in a bid to protect the local and domestic enterprises that are operating in the country. And today we can talk about the fact that tariff barriers have been largely removed in high-income countries, thanks to different agreements that they have among themselves, like the WTO, NAFTA, EU. Firms that are operating within these regions enjoy a lot of benefits as a result of being part of these national and regional agreements. However, for firms who are coming from outside of these regional agreements, they face a number of setbacks and challenges when they want to breach and get into these markets to sell their products, right? So even though some tariff barriers have been taken down, within regions, we can also talk about non-tariff barriers that are still very much in place. So in the EU, for instance, recently we witnessed what they referred to as the Brexit, which was a large part of the EU that was taken out by the British people, just because they were tired of different countries in the European Union that they believed were not countries that deserved the benefits that the EU gave them, who were coming into the British people's territory and taking away jobs from the British people. So they were complaining of things like people coming from Poland and other countries like Greece and less endowed EU countries infiltrating Britain to take away jobs from the British people and accepting menial salaries for jobs that British people would have done for more money. So the British people thought, well, the only thing to do was to exit this European Union and save ourselves from all the restrictions that have been dropped as a result of being part of this union that are putting the local people in our country at a disadvantage, right? However, there are certain countries too that belong to these unions that have initiated their own non-tariff barriers. For instance, we have countries like Denmark and Norway that, although they are part of the EU, refuse to use the euro and have signed their own individual agreements with the European Union that give them certain privileges that do not make them a full party to all the benefits that the European Union offers to all the other members. And these are examples of non-tariff barriers that we can talk about under national controls.
Doc, the example about Brexit, was it not more of a nationalistic sentiment?
Exactly. That was what I was saying, that they were thinking more about their people, right? Why should people from Poland and Romania and all these Greek countries because of our being part of the EU, have free entry and exit to work in our country and do all the jobs and everything to the detriment of our people? This doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yes.
So it was in a bid to protect the British people. That's essentially what I'm saying. Is that what you mean?
Yes, that is what I meant. But I was looking at it more from a motivation point of view.
Okay.
Than on, encouraging the trade and commerce point of view.
Okay. That's another angle you can look at it from. Right. Like I said, the Brexit was a multifaceted issue. There were so many things that came into play, right? So what I'm saying is just one of those. What you also mentioned is one of those. So your point is justified.
Yeah, I think, Salihu, I would say that like my Doc is saying, there were a couple of stuff, but in most recent times, what had actually pushed them to sort of want to get out of Europe was because the other European countries were coming into the country, taking benefits, getting jobs, like taking jobs that are even below minimum wage and stuff like that. So that is what sort of cut the goat's neck really for them. So that's how come they did a Brexit.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that clarification. Salihu, please, are you okay now?
Oh, yes. I mean, I don't want to drag it within the context of restraining forces to globalization. Yes, it is.
Yes. And we're discussing it within those confines.
Exactly. So it's fine.
Even if I may add, I think one of the other things too that helped this Brexit thing to go on was the fact that a lot of decisions that the British thought should be national were being taken from Brussels. Yeah. So they felt like they have their own country, they can't run it. Like Europe kept on putting roadblocks in their way of doing things that they wanted to do.
That's true.
So that was also bad, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that submission. Okay.
Welcome.
Okay. So the next restraining force we can talk about is opposition to globalization. Now, to a number of people around the world, globalization is simply a threat, period. Allowing other people to come from other countries to do business in their country, to them is a huge threat. And this brought about the term globophobia, which is sometimes used to describe an attitude of hostility towards trade agreements, like we have just seen with Brexit, right? It's a form of globophobia, right? Such that they had opened up so much and they were beginning to see that opening up was becoming a threat to them. And they had to somehow close their economy back up to be able to maintain some power, right? So you realize that people in different parts of the world are sometimes hostile and opposed to trade agreements, right? To certain global brands, to certain company policies that appear to result in hardship for some individuals within their countries while benefiting others, right? So you realize that when Brexit was about to happen, there were a number of people who were all for it. And there were some people too who were so much against it, because looking at different sides of the coin, each person had their own ideologies as to how the exit was going to either benefit them or hurt them, right? So that's a typical example of globophobia. And it manifests itself sometimes through protests and sometimes through violence, which is directed at policymakers or sometimes towards well-known global companies, where the exit of Britain from the EU will have certain implications for indigenous British companies that still wish to do business in other EU countries. So that is another restraining force we can talk about in the form of opposition to globalization. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the introduction to global marketing. I don't know if anyone has any.
There's a question from the chat. Says, Doc, why is it this different from point 2? That is a person's asking a question, please.
How is it different from point 2?
Yeah, that was a question from the chat.
Okay. Opposition to globalization may not necessarily have legal backing, right? So national controls may be regulatory. They have legal backing in terms of decisions from government and actions taken by governments to actively protect domestic industries and domestic businesses. However, opposition to globalization may not necessarily have legal backing. For a long time, people did not like the fact that Britain was part of the EU, but they could not do anything to change it until the regulatory bodies, the government decided, okay, it's enough, we want to leave. So globophobia could be on an individual level, right? Or it could be at the regulatory level or the national level. However, the national controls, yeah.
I can give an example of a couple of American companies.
Please do.
Before we had globalization come up the way it is, China, people now believing in Chinese products and stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of American companies were against globalization in the sense that they thought that the Chinese would do the same products at a cheap cost. They are going to lose business. So it's like they are fully against it, but it's come to stay now. Yeah.
Exactly. And until Donald Trump came into power, it felt the United States government was not doing enough. So Donald Trump came into power and he started fighting against the Chinese, and all these companies all of a sudden were very happy because what they had been against for so long, the government was now taking action on. So thank you very much for that submission. It's a prime example that explains what we are talking about. My lady, please, are you okay now?
Yes, I'm okay. I'm not the one who asked the question, but somebody also said, I think it's a typical example of this is what happened in South Africa. I don't know what she's talking about. It's from Bridget.
There's xenophobia.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So it was an individual level. So that is opposition to globalization. The people, the citizens didn't want the people in the country, but the government would not kick them out. So the people themselves decided to engage in protests and use physical violence to get rid of the people. Right. So that's a typical example of opposition to globalization. Thank you, Bridget. I think I have to give.
All right, Madam. Good evening once again.
Good evening.
Yes, please, what point does product grading, what I mean by that is maybe the same product, but of different quality in terms of grade, and then whereby some companies push the lower or the higher grade into areas where they think they will make less profit and areas where they will make higher profit respectively. At what point does they come in?
I think it comes in terms of national controls and trade agreements. In countries like the EU, before you can get your product into any of the markets there, the product has to meet a certain minimum requirement in terms of quality and formulation. In other parts of the world, like Africa, there are not strict rules like that. So you realize that a number of the decisions that are taken by governments to prevent this thing of bringing cheap products to third world countries and selling them is what we call dumping. They dump the products here because they know that here people will be able to buy them because we have a lot of people living below the poverty line, right? So it's called dumping. So a number of those things that you're talking about are as a result of trade agreements and national controls. You can't take certain substandard products to the EU. You can't take certain substandard products to the US, but you can bring them to countries like Ghana and Nigeria. So you realize that even in Ghana, certain products that are manufactured by indigenous Ghanaians for export are in different grades. The ones that are sold on the Ghanaian market have a different look and feel from the ones that are sold outside in foreign markets.
All right, well noted, thanks.
Okay.
Doc, I have a question, please.
Please speak.
Very well. So on the opposition to globalization, could we say that force majeure, it's also an opposition to globalization? I'm talking in terms of what is happening now, especially with the COVID-19, which more or less has hampered any form of companies trying to even expand to other parts of the world and all that. Could it also be an opposition to globalization?
If it is man-made, yes. If it is what Trump is saying, then yes, it's an opposition to globalization, where the virus was manufactured in a Wuhan lab.
That's why I didn't say act of God, but I said force majeure.
Yes. So if it is as it is alleged, then yes, it's an opposition to globalization.
How about if it's an act of God? But still,
if it's an act of God, then it is out of our hands. I wouldn't call it an opposition to globalization.
Exactly.
I'll call it a natural phenomenon.
That is true.
All right, Doc. So adding to what my brother just said, and it actually came up in our previous class.
Yeah.
At what, globalization is strategy, right? Yes. At what point that chance or serendipity comes to play?
It comes to play all through the decision making.
If you say chance and serendipity comes to play throughout this decision making?
Yes, because you never know when a chance or an opportunity will pop up and where it will come from.
Do you plan for it? Because strategy is planning.
Yes,
or you just,
but strategy is planning within certain confines. That is why as part of strategy we have control. Because you cannot plan for every single eventuality. So
that means chance and serendipity comes to play along the line.
Along the line.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Doug, I share a different view on this.
Okay.
The reason being, during COVID today, there are organizations that are benefiting from this pandemic in terms of perhaps during lockdown, the manufacturing of PPE and stuff like that.
Chance?
No, it is not chance.
Are you sure? Because they never saw it coming.
Yes, but it is not chance. You see, I would rather say an opportunity has presented itself, and through planning, they've been able to capitalize on that opportunity.
Okay,
there are a lot of companies that are sinking because they haven't been able to effectively have what we call a continuity plan when it comes to disruption.
Yeah.
You need to, and as part of, for every giant organization, business continuity is something that needs to be an integral part of management functions.
Yeah.
So chance, what do you call it, luck, it's a bit difficult for me to appreciate.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Salu, can ill luck come to play?
Hello, Doc.
Yeah. Please speak. Please speak.
Hello, Doc.
Yes, I'm here. I can hear you.
Doc.
Yes, please speak.
Yes, my name is Ivan Stano.
Yes, Ivan.
I so far I think I like you, and I would like to add to the conversation that Saliu and Kwame Akwa are talking about.
Yeah.
I'll give a classical example with this COVID thing, whether chance or proper planning. Saliu, there is a company in Ghana called Gihog Distillery Company.
Yeah.
They manufacture alcohol, right? This COVID came and manufacturing, sales went down. However, this thing presented itself and they realized they could produce hand sanitizers. Would you say they ever planned for it? Is it not chance that this situation has presented itself for them to go into the manufacturing of an additional product, which was never part of their prime business or core business?
Evans, hold on.
So for me, it is a chance they were in a business of producing alcoholic beverage. A situation came and it presented itself. Now Ghana is not important. Therefore, we have to locally produce hand sanitizers. Then they realize that, because we produce alcohol, we can turn it into hand sanitizers. And it went. This is what we call chance. There was something existing.
Okay, so let me respond. Let me respond. Okay, so from a business planning point of view,
yes,
any serious-minded organization before the turn of the year, so let's say you are in Q4 of 2019, you need to sit and plan for what your 2020 will look like.
Yeah.
So you need to forecast in terms of revenue, so whatever product that you are selling, and then what your expenditure is going to be, and what your projected margins or profit is going to be at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Now, if Gihok is a serious organization, they need to sit from Q4 of, and there are some organizations that begin planning in Q2 of the prior year to sit and look out for other opportunities that they can use their capex, which is the production plant, to do.
Yeah.
So for them, it could be an issue, but if they are a serious organization, this should have been part of their strategy, their plan, and their, tactic. And to say that today, if people stop drinking alcohol, what can we use that huge expenditure in terms of plants that we have? What else can we use it for?
That's true.
And that is why a lot of organizations, if you look at Coca-Cola, for instance, they started diversifying into different models. Coca-Cola, for the best part of close to about 70 years, only had Coke, only Coke.
Yeah.
But they realized that they had that capital structure and they needed to, what businessmen call, sweat the asset. So the asset is there. If you don't produce, it's still there. You are still cleaning it, you're still oiling it, you're still servicing it. So you need to have that forward thinking and forward planning so that if the opportunity presents itself, then you can take advantage of it. There are a lot of other organizations that are set up to produce alcohol, but yet they are not, producing sanitizers. What about them?
So we all agree that it is a matter of planning as far as you can, but then having the ability to make sure that you are able to take advantage of such chances and opportunities when they come up.
Yes, that is all we are saying, Doc. That is all I'm saying. For example, and I want to somehow say this.
Yeah.
Sally, our garment companies or the fashion industry, like those who are now been engaged to produce PPEs, did they ever think of producing PPEs? It was not part of what they were looking at. It doesn't mean that they were myopic or they didn't think into the future. It was something that did not necessarily. And I can sit here and say that a company, some of the telcos, they have not even exhausted even the opportunities there, like MTN. There are things now that may be covered or something for you to now take advantage of.
Chief Tando, Let me
Yes.
add this. Doug and Salil, the whole aim of strategy is to increase profitability, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the sole aim. Mr. Salil, please can you respond?
Profitability and
No,
sustainability.
go ahead. Make your point. I can't agree or disagree with you unless I hear you. Go ahead.
So you can't agree if strategy brings profit.
Doug,
Then there's no point in me continuing.
No, it depends on the type of organization. There are some not-for-profit organizations that don't aim
Okay,
for
so
profit.
can I invoke the ceteris paribus here again? So that,
Okay.
yeah. I think that
Okay.
would save us all.
Doug,
Good.
But you have to hear
So-
from, I'm saying that opportunity
Yeah.
presents, you have to take the chance to be able to do the opportunity. So if opportunity can present itself at any time, but if the chance is not there for you to do, if you don't do it, chances make you fail. So if it is a necessity, it is a risk. So even if the opportunity presents itself, if I have COVID and I'm going to go to sanitizer, how long will the COVID last?
Yeah.
Is it going to last for 2 days or this? That is where the chance comes in. So you have to be able to know your risk level, but opportunity comes anytime. But you have to know that, take the risk and say, I'll go into this business because I think it will take me a longer time to, because chances give you the opportunity to fail or succeed.
Yeah.
I said,
Let me just say this.
Doug,
One
Doug,
final
Doug,
thing. You see,
what Salihu was
opportunity.
saying.
Sometimes
Salihu,
organizations go to
Doug, my
actively
hands are
seek
up. Oh.
opportunity. So
Salihu,
you don't just, the opportunity doesn't sometimes present itself. You actively go and seek for that opportunity.
that is it.
I gave the
That's it.
example of mobile money.
Which
So
may mishit, which may be a misfortune in the long run.
The firm can either actively go in search or it can be presented to them, which goes back to what
exactly.
So you can either, which we will see very soon.
Doc, I agree with you.
Active and others are.
And I like you.
Doc.
So let's
Doug,
go
my
on.
hands are up.
Doc, I'm here. Patricia.
Patricia. Okay.
Yeah.
Patricia will speak and then we will move on. I think there are some.
Yeah, but the name is Asamoah. The name is Asamoah.
Okay, please speak.
Saliu, I don't think University of Ghana thought of us going on having this lecture online.
Yeah.
So MTN wouldn't, or Vodafone couldn't have thought of selling data to University of Ghana students through the GRASAC and the school authorities.
Yeah.
So Saliu, in a way, I think opportunities come and people take advantage, companies take advantage of it.
Yeah, and that's the reactive.
Madam,
yes.
The
telcos took advantage. Let me land. Can I land? The telcos took advantage. Hello, please allow me to land.
Okay, so
the telcos have taken advantage of the COVID and the online studies to sell data to University of Ghana. Although they were selling,
and then again, Sally will say that they projected that they will make so profit at the end of the year. Yeah, so that's what we say. They're still overseeing the target.
Can I please say something? This is
let me tell you.
Let me answer them something.
We have to move on.
They never knew the and then sell data to us.
This incident could have happened, and we couldn't have taken that. What do you call it? Opportunity, because we don't have the capacity.
Exactly.
To
That's why I invoke certain variables that let's
Doc.
Exactly.
And then think within the ceteris paribus confine. That
Doc, let's come back to my question I asked. Does strategy always bring us up about profit? You said yes. Salu says he begs to differ.
I didn't say strategy always brings about profit. I didn't say.
Okay.
I said
so strategy doesn't bring about profit. That was the point of strategy.
You can fail. You can strategize, but you fail.
Get profit, but it will not always bring you profit.
If things are not working,
you can fail.
The firm can quickly
fail.
And fix.
Yes, you don't know.
Right?
Okay.
So it can go either way. All right, please, let's move on.
You come, Mandela.
Thank you all for your submissions. Let's move on. Okay, so next we are going to talk about the initiation of internationalization, right? So what is internationalization? It essentially occurs when the firm expands either its research and development, its production, selling, and any other business activities into international markets. But when it comes to the size of the firm and the nature of the operation, internationalization may proceed in different ways. So for instance, when we are talking about larger firms, they have the capability and the competence as well as the resources to be able to undertake various internationalization stages, right? And perform various foreign market expansion projects and activities at the same time, sometimes in incremental steps over a period of time. However, when we are talking about more small and medium-sized enterprises, they are often not in the position to engage in internationalization on such a scale as the large firms do, right? So they tend to be more cautious and treat internationalization as a distinct individual venture and take it one step at a time. So that is it for internationalization and how it proceeds in terms of larger firms and smaller and medium-sized firms. So what are the motives that firms have for going international? We can talk about two main motives: the proactive motives and the reactive. So the proactive motives is the one that Salihu was talking about, where the firm actively, right, strategizes and plans, right? So these motives represent the stimuli that the firm has identified in the environment, the opportunities that they have seen, or the potential opportunities that they have seen that they can take advantage of based on their interests and the competencies and the resources that they have. And they do this by strategizing proactively to be able to take advantage of these different opportunities that they have seen based on the fact that they feel they have the competencies and the resources to undertake such activities. And that is what we call proactive motives. So proactive motives are undertaken independently by the firm of their own accord. However, the reactive motives are the reverse. The firm does not actively strategize and plan for it. However, certain events and occurrences take place that necessitate the firm to take a reaction. Right? And sometimes these reactions may be as a result of the pressures that are placed on the firm, either by competitors in their industry or the regulations in the local environment that they operate, right? Or foreign market conditions that they do not have a choice than to react to, like the COVID situation we are facing. And some of these things they have to react to. If they do not react, will become a threat to the firm in their home country, or perhaps in the foreign markets that they are operating in. So the firm has no other option than to react to this pressure or threats that they are facing, either in their domestic environment or their foreign environment, through undertaking these internationalization activities. So that is it for the proactive and reactive measures. So let's see some examples of proactive and reactive measures. For proactive measures, we can talk about profit and growth goals, which is the #1 reason why firms strategize. They are strategizing so that they can make sure that they have the best opportunity to make the maximum amount of profit to help them grow and expand in the marketplace and perhaps become the market leaders. Proactive measures could also be managerial edge. Like I said, sometimes you can have the management of the firm, be it an individual or a group of people, pushing for the firm to undertake certain international or foreign market activities that they believe will be profitable for the firm and that the firm can benefit from. And that is another proactive measure in the form of managerial edge. We can also talk about technology competence or unique products. A firm may develop a unique competence that they believe that they can sell beyond their domestic market to foreign markets that can give them some form of competitive edge or advantage. Or they may even believe that they have a unique product that they can sell in foreign markets at optimal value. And that would be a proactive reason for them to actively engage in internationalization. Another thing too we can talk about is foreign market opportunities and market information. Perhaps the firm is operating in their domestic market and they hear of perhaps a new law that has been enacted in the foreign market, or a new customer base that has emerged in the foreign market. That gives them the opportunity to sell what hitherto they could only sell to people in their domestic environment, to people in these foreign markets. And that will enable them to proactively go ahead and internationalize. We can also talk about economies of scale, right? Firms would see that they have the opportunity to sell more in foreign markets and spread their costs over a larger number of produce. That will give them higher margins. So they will go ahead and internationalize because they see opportunities for economies of scale. Some firms will also internationalize because of tax benefits. Recently, because of the COVID pandemic that happened and China shut down their economy, Japan took the opportunity to start selling themselves to the US and convincing US companies to move their factories from China to Japan in lieu of certain tax benefits. So in this case, the firms who decide that, okay, Japan is offering tax benefits, let's take advantage of that and move our company, is taking a proactive response because they have seen that there are certain benefits in terms of tax to be gained in Japan if they move their factory from China to that place. So these are examples of proactive motives. We can also talk about reactive motives, the first one being competitive pressures. And this one is a very common one because if you are a firm and you are operating in a particular market and you realize that your competition is going beyond the local market to expand into other markets, which you also have competencies to be able to participate in, any firm with the right resources, knowing that they can be able to strategize and achieve those objectives, will go ahead and also undertake that activity, knowing that their competition is also doing the same thing. And we've always been told that competition is a good thing because it pushes firms to perform at their optimal capacity. So if the competition are doing something and the firm does not want to be left behind, the pressure from this competitive edge will push them to also undertake this internationalization activity. And the classic reason why firms react with internationalization as a response is the size and saturation of the domestic market. Some firms realize that they have sold as much as they can in their domestic market and they have nowhere else to expand to. The word always is causing problems. Okay, so I'll do my best to use it sparingly. All right, so like I was saying, when it comes to the domestic market, some firms realize that they have exhausted the size of the markets that they can reach. They have exhausted the potential customer base that they can reach. So they would want to expand into other markets because the current market they're operating in is saturated. Perhaps not just because of them, but because the market is dominated by other competitors who are competing with them for a small market space. So they will expand and try to find other markets that will help them to be able to expand their borders and sell more of their products to a larger customer base. Another reactive motive is overproduction and excess capacity. When a firm has produced more than they can sell in the domestic market, they'll begin to find a foreign market to be able to sell their products in. And that is one of the reactive measures because if they have overproduced, they cannot allow the stock to sit and get destroyed. So they would want to find a means of letting go of the stock. And that is one of the things that can push a firm to expand into a foreign country, sorry. So you realize that certain firms overproduce for foreign markets and the excess is sent down to countries like Africa for us to buy because they cannot sell all that they have produced in the markets that they produce them for. We can also talk about unsolicited foreign orders, and this happens a lot, especially to some entrepreneurs that I know. Initially, they did not have any plan of going international until someone bought their product and took it into a foreign market and sensitized the people in those markets to the existence of that product. All of a sudden, they started receiving orders from customers in these foreign markets, which pushed them to start sending products to consumers in these markets. And though these orders were all solicited, they forced the company to think about perhaps selling their products in foreign markets. And that is what we talk about when we say unsolicited foreign orders. We can also talk about extending the sales of seasonal products. And we see this happening in our country and in Africa almost all the time. Once summer is over, they put all the summer clothing that is left over from Europe and the Americas and all those countries that enjoy the warm summer weather. And they pack them into bales and bring it to us in Ghana to buy because the season for those clothing is over. And by the time the next season comes around, there'll be a fresh set of clothing that is going to be sold. So they have to pack up and ship all these seasonal products that they created for the summer over there to other markets to sell because then the next season that is coming, the clothing are not conducive for. So that is an example of extending the sales of seasonal products. Then we can talk about proximity to international customers and psychological distance. Psychological distance basically talks about the fact that consumers in a particular country share certain similarities, certain psychological and behavioral similarities with the consumers in the other market. So we can talk about the fact that when it comes to the UK and Ghana, we have a smaller psychological distance with people from the UK than we do with people from France. We can say that the psychological distance between France and Cote d'Ivoire perhaps is shorter than the psychological distance between Ghana and the UK. So it is easier for a company in the UK to ship their products down to Ghana for sale than for a company in France to do the same thing. So that is what we call proximity to international customers and psychological distance. Again, Togo is just a stone throw away from Ghana. It is easier for us to sell our products in Togo than for us to carry our products all the way to a country like, say, Egypt or Mali to go and sell, because they are not in close proximity to us. So that is it for proactive and reactive motives. I don't know if anyone has a question to ask.
Please, Doc, can you throw more light on the unsolicited foreign orders, please?
Okay, so unsolicited foreign orders is like, let's say I am a kente manufacturer. I weave kente cloth and I sell, but I only sell to people in Ghana. So I sell to people in the Ashanti region, Western region, Central region. And then perchance someone sends me an order from Chicago in the US. I know very well that I have not advertised in the US. I have not sent a Facebook advert or an Instagram advert around for my product. However, I'm receiving an order from this foreign location, meaning that order is what? Unsolicited. But because I am perhaps a proactive entrepreneur who sees an opportunity there, I will decide that, okay, even though I didn't ask for the order, let me find out a means of fulfilling this order. So I'll begin to send my kente cloth to people in this location who are making these orders, either through DHL or FedEx or other means. So that way, I'm internationalizing. I'm selling my products in foreign markets. However, it all started as a result of someone making an order, which was unsolicited. Please, does it make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Please, does anyone else have something they want to say or something they want to ask? Okay, then we can move on. All right. Now, even though these motives give companies the push to internationalize, there are certain things that serve as active barriers that may prevent a firm from going international. And I know a number of entrepreneurs who have stopped selling their products in foreign markets as a result of one or more of these barriers that we are about to discuss. There are three main barriers we can talk about in terms of internationalization. The number one barrier we can talk about is tariff barriers. And these are barriers in the form of duty or taxes that are levied on products that move across borders, from country to country or from region to region. And these may be classified on the basis of the direction, the purpose of the tariff, the length, the rate, as well as the distribution point where the tariff is charged. And we'll go into more detail of those very soon. We can also talk about non-tariff barriers, right? Where, unlike the tariffs, these ones are not direct levies, right? They are elusive and non-transparent means by which governments limit the amount of goods and services that move across borders. So in essence, we are saying that they are not straightforward and obvious, but they exist. And there are ways by which governments are able to place restrictions on how much products that foreigners can import into a country, as against domestic enterprises exporting out of the country. So here we want to note that both tariff and non-tariff barriers are government-induced restrictions. Whereas the third kind of barrier are private barriers that have nothing to do with the government, right? But they relate more to certain business practices or arrangements within or among affiliated firms, perhaps within an industry or a network, that limits firms who operate outside of these networks or business practices from internationalizing their products and services across borders. So let's go into more detail of these barriers, sorry. So for the tariff barriers, for instance, we can talk about in terms of the direction of product movement. So here it's determined by whether the product is moving outside of the domestic market to a foreign market or from a foreign market into the domestic market. And from experience, we know that import duties are usually higher than export duties because governments always want to limit the amount of goods and services that people import into the country and encourage more local enterprises to export their wares outside of the country. So we can also talk about the purpose of the tariff. Some tariffs are levied simply to protect the indigenous industries, because without these tariffs to limit the amount of imports that are brought into the country, the domestic industries do not have anywhere near the amount of resources and competencies that these foreign firms have to be able to compete on an even playing ground. So the government will usually levy these tariffs to protect the local industries from the unfair competition that the foreign markets are bringing into their space. Then we have revenue tariffs, whereby the tariffs are levied simply to raise revenue for the government of the country. So you realize that the tariffs are not in any way meant to protect local industries or to forestall any form of activity, but simply to make sure that the government gets more resources. Yes, Bridget, specifications set by governments are a form of non-tariff. And these specifications have to be outside of duties that are levied. Yeah, so anything apart from duties that the government makes in terms of specification is non-tariff. So yes.
Okay, thank you, Doc.
Okay. Then we can also talk about the length of time. Now, tariff surcharges are duties or tariffs that are levied for a very short period of time. So they are always enacted for a particular purpose. Currently, Donald Trump has enacted a number of tariff surcharges against specific products that are coming into America from China. Now, depending on how he feels about China in the next few months or few years, assuming he stays president, those surcharges may either stay or be removed, right? However, when we talk about tariffs like countervailing or what we call the anti-subsidy, these are permanent tariffs that are levied by governments to permanently protect their countries from dumping. Now, dumping usually occurs when firms in foreign markets produce in excess capacity as a result of subsidies that they are given by their governments. So, for instance, a country like Germany has been given some subsidies by their government, which enables them to avoid paying certain taxes and incurring certain costs and help them to produce so much of a particular product. And they produce so much that it is too much for the local or domestic market to consume. So they have to ship the excess off to other markets. Now, because they have produced in so much excess, they can afford to sell the product at rock bottom cheap prices to foreign markets as a result of that subsidy. So to counter or cancel out these subsidies that the governments in their country have given them, which enable them to produce these cheap products and send to other markets, the domestic market will also enact their own tariff to cancel out this subsidy. So the cost that they are in, the cost effectiveness they are enjoying from their government, they will have to suffer for in the domestic market that they are trying to import it. So that is what we call countervailing or anti-subsidy duty. So they may pay close to nothing for sending their products from their country, but when they are trying to bring it to our domestic market, they have to pay more to get it in. Then we can also talk about tariffs that are based on the rates applied. So some tariffs are a fixed rate in terms of percentage. So they can decide that for every amount of an item that you import, it is a fixed rate. You are paying perhaps 30% of the value of the items you are importing, or 60%, right? Sorry, that one is ad valorem, but for the fixed rate, it is a flat rate. It doesn't depend on value or anything. Regardless of the value of the product that you are importing, everybody is paying 50%. So if your product costs $1 million, you are paying 50% of the value of the product, regardless of its value. However, for ad valorem, it depends on value. So depending on how expensive or how cheap your product is, there's a certain percentage that they will charge if the product is of a certain value. We can see this happening with import duties. So your import duty is usually calculated based on the value of the car that you are importing. So the more expensive your car, the more duty that you pay. So that's an example of yeah.
Doc,
yeah.
I want to ask, is it always the case, especially in Ghana? Is it always the case, if Ghana is trading globally, does Ghana have the right to decide on a fixed rate?
Fixed rate in
is
terms
it always
of
like everything?
No,
everything.
We don't decide. We can only decide the rates for those who are importing into our country. But when we are exporting,
so we have the chance to decide.
Yes, we have a chance. Our government decides. Okay. That's why sometimes the government can say that. Remember, there was a tax that was levied on, is it imported chicken or rice at some point? You remember? Yes.
Yes, I think it was rice or so.
Good. They decided that they wanted to stop the flooding of our market with those kinds of rice from all those countries, to encourage us to start eating our local rice. So those who were importing were hemorrhaging because it had become so expensive. I think the same thing happened with the import of cars as well, and the import of spare parts. Right? Every government, as we will learn in our subsequent lectures about the regulatory environment, has their own mindset and ideology when it comes to the formulation of tariffs and how much they charge and their restrictions and regulations in terms of trade. Please, are you okay?
Yes, I am, please.
Okay. In terms of the cars, can you give an example? Because is it only the overage cars that they say we should import? Is that what you are trying to say?
No, I'm talking about the value car. For instance, if someone is importing a Bentley, that costs about $80,000. The amount of duty he will pay is not equal to someone who is importing, say, a Hyundai taxi, right?
So when the overage cars, where does it fit?
I think the overage cars, the government has a specific percentage, right? Is it a specific percentage, or is it a total outright embargo? Is it an embargo? Yes.
Yes, it is an embargo.
It's an embargo, right?
Yeah. So if you bring it, it's they charge you for punishment. It's a penalty.
Good. Good.
It's a penalty.
Good. My lady, I hope your question is answered.
I got it. But the penalty, the car give.
Please, there's so much feedback, I can barely hear you.
It's not from my end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I'm saying that the penalty charge is the car given to you or the car is confiscated and destroyed.
I think it's confiscated and you pay the penalty as
well.
No.
Doc.
Yes.
It's not confiscated.
Okay.
When you bring an overage car,
yes,
they charge you penalty for bringing, because it has an impact on the environment. So the penalty is on the impact on the environment, not because it's overage. They don't see it.
Okay, so they still allow the import of overage car, only that you pay a penalty.
Yes, but you pay penalty.
It's a protective tariff. It is a protective.
Thank you.
Yeah, to disincentivize people from bringing in overage cars.
Good, good, good.
And our definition of overage is 10 years and above. That's
good. So I'm sure it differs from country to country.
Then it's not an embargo, because embargo, you don't bring it at all. You see,
one of your colleagues has clarified that it's a protective tariff.
Connects the hub to the rim of the, should I say, the whole bicycle time frame. So that is the concept in which is used for the whole transshipment thing. Because
Okay, please, are we good now?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Please, I missed the point 2 and 3 due to bad network. So if you can kindly go over it for me, I would appreciate.
Okay, so the point 2 was about protective and revenue tariffs. So protective tariffs are where the tariff is levied to restrict the amount of imports that foreigners bring into our country or that our locals import into our country. And they just gave an example of the protective tariff to disincentivize people from importing overage cars. So that is an example of the protective tariff. Whereas for the revenue tariff, it's about the government just wanting to raise revenue. So if they notice that people are importing a particular type of product very often, they will levy more tariffs on it so that they can raise a lot of revenue as a result of the import of that product. Whereas the tariffs that are levied based on length of time, whereas all for the values that the tariffs that are levied based on length of time, we can talk about tariff surcharges, which are more temporary tariffs. And I gave an example as the tariff that has been levied by Donald Trump on all imports of specific products from China. So depending on how long Donald Trump stays angry at the Chinese, the tariff surcharge may either be extended or be taken off completely. However, for anti-subsidy or countervailing duties, they are permanent duties that are put in place to prevent foreigners from dumping their cheaply produced products into our domestic market. And that is usually done because these foreign companies that are importing into our country are able to produce at a cheap cost because of subsidies that their government is giving them. So if their government is giving them all these subsidies and they can produce at cheap rates and dump into our country, we will also charge them high duties so that it will make them desist from dumping their cheaply produced products into our market, right? And that is the explanation for the length of time tariffs. Then the rates applied is the one we just spoke about a fixed rate. So regardless of the value of the item you are importing or how much of it you are importing, or how old it is, or how long it is going to take you to import, there's a fixed rate that you have to pay. Whereas with the ad valorem duty, it is based on the value of the item that you are importing. So I gave an example that, for instance, if someone is importing an $80,000 Bentley, the amount of duty that they'll pay on that car is different from someone who is importing, say, a Toyota Highlander, because the value of the two cars are not the same. So they will not pay the same value in tariffs. Whereas some countries too can use a combination of these, where they have some fixed rate duties, as well as some ad valorem or duties that are levied based on value. Now we can finally talk about tariffs based on the distribution point at which they are collected. So some taxes are largely levied on the distributors or the manufacturers at source, and that is collected only once. So they charge the manufacturer and then they collect the tax at source. However, some taxes are passed on to the consumer, like value-added tax. So the VAT that we pay is as a result of the goods and services that we consume, right? So that is a typical example of distribution point. And VAT is usually paid when we, the consumers, purchase the product or service. So that is it for tariff barriers. Does anyone have any question they would like to ask or something they would like to say before we proceed? Because of the feedback, I had to mute everyone. So you will have to indicate that you have a question or submission so that we can unmute you. Okay, I presume everyone is okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, so let's move on to the non-tariff barriers. So for non-tariff barriers, we already explained them as being unlike tariffs because they are not direct levies of certain amount of money or percentages of value that you have to pay. However, they are more in the form of regulation and rigidities that companies, that governments place to restrict imports into their country. Bridget, you said you raised your hand. Okay, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Can I please go to the previous slide?
The tariff barriers. Is it this one?
Yes, please. Kindly give an example of the distribution or single state tax.
Okay, there are certain taxes that are only leveraged on distributors or manufacturers.
Okay.
Yes, sometimes it's as a result of the effects of their activities on the environment. So for instance,
Doc, can I please give an example?
By all means, please give an example.
All right. There is a tax on those producing sachet water and bottled water because of the plastic they use.
Yes.
So they pay one-time premium and it's paid by the manufacturers.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I think I get it.
Okay. Thank you too, Bridget. All right. So, like I was saying, for the non-tariff barriers, they are restrictions that governments put in place to hinder the activities of foreigners who want to import products or services into their markets, and doing it not necessarily through charging tariffs, but through regulations and other inhibitions that they put in the way of these companies and organizations. And one example we can talk about is government participation in trade. So you realize that governments will sometimes engage actively in trade within their domestic environment or within their boundaries to give the firms operating within the country's boundaries a competitive edge over the foreign countries. So you see that government, for instance, has taken particular interest in our cocoa industry, where they provide a lot of guidance and resources to farmers in the cocoa industry, just to make sure that they are in the best position to produce the best cocoa for export outside of Ghana. We can also talk about it in terms of government procurement, where government agencies actively decide not to procure items or products or services from any foreign suppliers or from any company that is not indigenous. So they would only procure or source from companies that are operating within their domestic region. And then, like other governments, they will also give subsidies to firms and enterprises operating in specific industries, manufacturing specific products, just to give them an edge when they are producing and manufacturing their products to sell in foreign markets. We can also talk about non-tariff barriers that have to do with not customs duty, but customs and entry procedures, where they put in place so many procedures to frustrate the process of foreigners who want to bring in certain products, or even locals who want to import certain products and services into the country. So customs and entry procedures can range anywhere from classifications to the valuation of the items, to even the amount of documentation you need, as well as certain licenses and permits that you may need to import certain products and services into the country. Customs procedures also include inspections, which is how some of them are able to identify the overaged cars that are being imported, as well as the unwholesome products that are sometimes imported through our borders. There are also several health and safety regulations that are put in place to continue to limit the dumping of substandard products and services onto our market. And we can see this from time to time, where the FDA sometimes comes out with regulations warning Ghanaians about products and services, and sometimes some medications and food items that have not been approved by the FDA, which in their opinion violates the health and safety regulations of Ghana. We can also talk about products requirements, where some governments will actively expect foreigners who are importing certain products, or domestic companies who are importing products from foreign countries, to have certain standards of the products that they are importing. The products have to meet certain standards in terms of their packaging, their labeling, the markings that they have on them, and product testing. Because before a person is allowed to import a product into Ghana, I believe that they have to send a sample of the product to the FDA, if it's a food item or a medicine, for the FDA to do product testing and check the specifications and standards to make sure that the product is good enough to be sold to the Ghanaian populace. And these are all examples of product requirements. We can also talk about quotas in terms of import quotas and export quotas. Usually governments will put restrictions on the number or amount of items that can be imported into a country in a specific product category or service. And then they can also decide to put certain restrictions on the number of items in a particular food category or product category that can be exported out of the country. So the government can decide that, for instance, they are limiting the import of rice, say to 100 metric tons a year. So that means that once that quota has been reached, they are not going to allow any more import of rice into the country. Whereas they can decide that they have unlimited export quotas where citizens or enterprises in the country can export as much as they can to foreign markets. However, where they feel that a particular kind of product or service is not enough to satisfy the local or domestic market, they can place an export quota to limit the amount of product that is sent out to the foreign market, because perhaps in their opinion, there's not enough to satisfy the local citizenry, let alone export to other foreign countries. And then we can see other forms of financial controls that the government can put in place aside from tariffs, including exchange controls, right? Multiple exchange rates, prior import deposits, credit restrictions, profit remittance restrictions. These are all popular ways by which governments are known to control the rate at which foreigners can export and import into a domestic market. Recently, we saw what happened when the dollar the Ghanaian cedi was losing value against the dollar. The government had to put in place active controls to make sure that people limited the amount of transactions they did using the dollar to ensure that the cedi would stabilize. That's a prime example of financial controls under non-tariff barriers. I don't know if anyone has anything they want to say before we proceed. Does anyone have anything they want to say?
Can we throw more on the multiple exchange rates?
Okay, so when we talk about multiple exchange rates, for instance, it is where the government sets different exchange rates for a particular currency, depending on the transaction that you are doing, right? So for instance, when it comes to, let me use a prime example of the University of Ghana, for instance. When it comes to special programs, faculty are paid using the dollar rate. However, government has a rate that they set for the university to pay faculty when they are claiming for their teaching. And it is different from the dollar exchange rate that is used normally when someone, for instance, walks to a forex bureau and they want to change dollars into cedis. So I remember at one point, the exchange rate for paying faculty for their special programs in the University of Ghana was 3 Ghana cedis, 80 pesos. At that time, in the outside market, in the regular market, when you go to change a dollar in the forex bureau, it was around 4 cedis, 50 pesos. And that rate stayed the same for a long time, even though the dollar rate in the actual market kept increasing. So it got to about 5 cedis, where there were several petitions made and the rate was adjusted. But even that, it did not come to the same value as the one on the regular market. It came close, but it wasn't the same. Please, do you understand?
Yes, I get it now. Thank you.
Good. So that's multiple.
Doc, adding to yours, another example is maybe if you receive remittance from Western Union or MoneyGram or Real or something,
good,
the rate is usually lower than the bank rate or the intermarket rate.
Good, good. That's another good example. Thank you for that submission. So my lady, I think this clarifies it for you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. So let's move on to the last type of barrier that we can talk about, which is private barriers. And these ones usually have to do with firm level issues, firm level, industry level, sector level issues. And the first one we can talk about is insufficient finances. Not every firm has the financial muscle to be able to undertake the Herculean task of internationalization. It may look like a straightforward process, but strategizing for it alone and putting in place all the different structures that you have to make sure you enhance your levels of success requires a huge amount of financial commitment, which a number of organizations are not up to. So until they have that level of finance, they will not be able to take advantage of the opportunities available in internationalization. Also, we can talk about insufficient market knowledge. Some firms may have the financial power, they may have the resources, but they may not know much about the foreign markets that they want to enter into, to be able to fully take advantage of the opportunities that are available in that market. So that's another private barrier that firms may face. Another barrier we can talk about is lack of foreign market connections. There are certain markets that there's no way you can enter individually on your own as a firm. You need to be able to have some kind of connection or some network within the foreign market that you can use as your point of entry. So some firms without these market connections are unable to enter into the foreign market of their choice. And as you will learn very soon, some markets without having any connection or network in them, there's no way that you can enter. You always have to go through some kind of connection or network within that market before you can gain access. The next thing we can also talk about is lack of export commitment. Not every firm is fully committed to export or to internationalization or to putting their products out there. It could be the case that top management had decided that we should go international. However, being that it is a top-down approach, those at the lower levels of management are expected to implement. And if at any point in time, top management decides that they are no longer committed to the whole internationalization export thing, it puts a dent in the activities of those downstream, such that regardless of what those at the lower levels of the hierarchy do, because top management is not committed to it, there is no way that they can push for the internationalization to go through. We can also talk about lack of capital to finance expansion into foreign markets, which in a way reverts back to the insufficient finances. Firms may not have enough of a capital base to undertake the Herculean task of expanding into foreign markets. Perhaps they may start on a smaller level by dealing with individual exports or exporting through a particular subsidiary. However, to be able to expand fully by setting up a whole subsidiary of their own in the foreign market or establishing an entire presence in the foreign market from top level to lower level management will take significant amounts of capital, which the firm may not have at their disposal. We can also talk about the lack of productive capacity to dedicate to foreign markets. Some firms may not even be able to actually satisfy the demand in their domestic market. So they do not have enough capacity to satisfy the domestic market, let alone produce to satisfy a foreign market. And that is what we refer to when we talk about the lack of productive capacity to dedicate to foreign markets. And then finally, we can talk about lack of foreign channels of distribution. A firm may want to internationalize, and they may not have had the opportunity to set up a whole subsidiary or an entire set of operations in the foreign market. The only option available to them may be to use a particular distributor or an agent. However, perhaps in those markets that they want to enter into, they do not have the luxury or the channels of distribution to be able to do this are unavailable. So the only option is for them to go and set up their own subsidiary in the foreign market to be able to facilitate their exports. And that is one major barrier that several firms face when it comes to internationalizing. So that brings us to the end of private barriers, being the third set of barriers that can stop a firm from going international. And at the same time, brings us to the end of our lecture for today. Please, does anyone have anything they want to say, any sentiments they would like to share before we sign off for today?
I think by and large, this has been one of the most interesting, I would say, quite practical or something you can really apply in our daily international business.